This video is just explaining our trip to Medellin. First thing I want to talk about is like the culture differences. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's big. But the first thing I want to say is slamming doors on the cars. So what I consider just closing my door is considered completely slamming your door in Colombia.
In Colombia, their cars are like their babies.
They are, yeah. Every Uber that I got out of, they would always say, be careful with the door. And they would say that specifically to gringos because we slam our doors here in the country. So I think that's weird because I take care of my car really well, but I definitely, considered by them, I slam my door. I'll say one more thing about Ubers. Technically, they're illegal. And did you know that?
Yeah.
Uber, you pretend that you do know them. So like whenever an Uber driver comes by, one of you has to sit in shotgun. On top of that, they'll act like, especially when we went to the airport, like she got out and gave me a hug. I was like, maybe they're super friendly, but it's because at the airport there's a lot of police and you don't want to be seen getting into an Uber. Now, getting into a taxi is completely legal, but the reason why they've banned Ubers is because it's taking such a big hit on their taxi industry, which in the United States, we call that innovation. I prefer Uber because they're safer. You can see their profile. I don't know. For me, I feel more safe. There's less cocaine. Let's talk about that actually. Was there any time in Colombia that you felt particularly unsafe? Is there any time? Because there's one time, and I don't want to say I didn't feel safe, but there was one time that stuck out more than others. I'm curious if you had one as well.
I think I know what you're talking about. Whenever we were by the clubs.
That's exactly it. So the taxi drivers. So we were having a friend pick us up, and because Ubers are illegal in Colombia. They kept canceling because it was such a busy street. Was it busy or why were they canceling? It was just hard for them to find us.
It took so long for them to get into that street.
Okay, so it was like we were at the center of the city.
It was by the place with the bamboo and the river.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it wasn't El Poblado, which if you're unfamiliar with Medellin, El Poblado is like, I guess it kind of depends on how you look at it, but it's generally speaking the safest place just because the majority of the people there are gringo. There's a lot more cops there. Now, you could also take that in another sense that because there's a lot of gringos, there's a lot more petty theft, which is probably true. But overall, it's a pretty safe place. And whenever you're in El Poblado, you don't feel like, you're doing something too crazy. But so when we left and we were in the central of the city, for me, the time that I felt, I guess, least safe, because 99% of the time, I think it was pretty safe. So let's go back to the original part. So the part that I felt least safe was when we couldn't get an Uber to come pick us up. So we were talking around to taxi drivers, and one of them was joking, but it wasn't funny to me because I was still new to Medellin, still new to Colombia, and I was still a little bit on edge. And he made a joke about selling us cocaine, and I have no idea if the joke was serious or not.
Bro, I feel like he was serious.
I think so too. But there was like the taxi drivers quoting us at like maybe $2 or $3 more than we're used to paying. And we were like, why? Like we were just trying to get an Uber, but then he was like, I'll throw in some cocaine. And I was like, I don't know, for me, I just felt super uncomfortable because I was like, this is the part of Colombia that everyone tells me to avoid. So I was like, let's try not to get into that accidental scene. And now, maybe he was joking, but I
feel like he was serious.
I feel like he was probably serious too. So
let's try to sweeten the deal.
So I will say, generally speaking, Ubers are safer than taxis because Ubers, they have a profile, they have an account, they have ratings. And for me, I just felt it was safer. Now let's talk about the weather of Colombia, but of Medellin specifically. So the city has a nickname, Eternal Primavera, something like that. I can't say it in Spanish, I don't know why. It's called the Eternal Spring because all year round, it has pretty much the same weather. The only difference between the summertime and the wintertime, it rains more in the wintertime. But the weather, relatively, is between 70 and 80 all year round, which is just amazing. So I want to talk about two things. One, do you recommend that type of weather to everyone in the world? And then secondly, did the rain bother you too much? Because I will say it kind of rained every day. It just wasn't that bad.
Bro, I loved the rain. I thought it was so nice. And honestly, I don't think anyone's going to complain about 70 or 80 degrees all year.
Yeah. I'm in a Facebook group chat about people that live in Medellin, actually. Someone asked the question, how would you describe Medellin towards U.S. cities? And I almost wanted to say the culture of Vegas was more of the party scene, I felt like. I felt like Medellin was very let's go have a good time.
Especially in El Poblado.
But the part that I hate about Vegas is that it's 120 degrees in the summertime. In Medellin, it's LA weather. It's like the prices of Nebraska, the weather of LA, and the culture of Vegas. That is just such a wonderful combination.
And the sort of nice people you find in the South.
Right. But then maybe the safety of Memphis. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know.
The safety of Detroit.
Yeah. I do think that it was safe, but you can't have everything in this world. You got to give up some things. I do think Medellin is safe, I really, really do, but it's not the US. Like, if you were to get kidnapped, if you were to get robbed, there's less things that you can do. For the most part, though, all the crime that exists in Medellin is petty crime. It's theft, it's pickpocketing, it's things like that. If you're drunk and by yourself, you're gonna get your phone stolen. If you're drunk by yourself in the middle of the night in a side of town you shouldn't be in. Yeah. So, you gotta be smart, but it really doesn't take that high of an IQ to stay out of danger. It's just no dar papaya. You remember what that means?
Right.
They have a phrase here, it's no dar papaya. As long as they don't have a reason to rob you or whatever it is, they're not gonna do it.
The most dangerous part of Colombia, I think it's fair to say, is the women. So for the most part, you can, if you just run into someone, at the gym, in a store, the mall, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. No. You don't gotta be scared of them. But it's a big deal in Colombia that they'll try to take advantage, especially of foreigners, because they know they can. A lot of foreigners, they get easily tempted by the Colombian women. So there's a lot of people that go there with the wrong intentions. And so for that reason, women are the most dangerous part of it because it's very easy to get manipulated. I'd say the places that you don't want to meet women, especially in Colombia, is bars, parties, Tinder. You want to meet girls organically. I think if you have a friend that you trust and he recommends somebody, typically every single person I know that's ever been to Colombia, their only real problems came from a bad date. The thing that I've heard they do is they can put some kind of strip of drugs on their finger or their hand, and it's nothing obvious, but if they put those drugs anywhere near your nose where you can ingest it, you can pass out and they'll rob you. Majority of the time, though, if that happens, for the people that I do know, because I do know some people that did happen to, they got $50 stolen from them. It wasn't even their passport or anything. So I just want to put into perspective, if you live in Latin America long enough, it's not if you get robbed, it's when. But most of the time, they're not looking for that $7,000 jackpot of that guy that I told you about. There's one guy we knew that got $7,000. Well, we didn't know him, but we saw a video of him. He got $7,000 stolen from him. That is crazy. But he is the only person I know where that happened. It is super important that you are conscious about those things. You don't want to put yourself in bad situations. It's really not that hard to do. Just have a level head, be sane, no dar papaya, and you'll be okay. That's generally how it is. The next thing, let's talk about the accents. So I think for us, we're not, what level of Spanish do you think we are? Intermediate. We ask people all the time, what level of Spanish do you think we have? They kept saying we were 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, and it's
usually 7 or 8.
They were being very, very generous, in my opinion. I think we're intermediate because there were so many things that we couldn't translate, but we understood kind of what was happening just based off of context.
We definitely understood enough to get by, but sometimes we were
yeah. There was a few times where we were you just say okay because you have no idea what's happening and you're just just get me out of this. But so for the most part though, because we're not at a super high level of Spanish, I do think that it is a little bit hard to distinguish the difference between accents. So I would say Colombian accent I really do enjoy, but there are a lot of different accents in Colombia. So the one in Medellin specifically, I personally really loved. I think it's probably the favorite one that I've heard so far. In the US, you can say, oh, that guy's from Boston. Oh, that guy's from, wherever,
Alabama.
Texas, Alabama. Yeah. So it's a little bit hard to distinguish accents in your second language. But the two accents that I mostly heard was Medellin and then people from Venezuela. And I will say, for the most part, I was never sure which one they were from, but if I had a harder time understanding them,
they're probably from Venezuela.
They're from Venezuela. I will say, for the most part, I think Venezuelan accents were harder than Medellin. I could understand, let's be generous here, say 60 to 70% of Colombian accents, but maybe 30% of Venezuelan accents. So typically, if I couldn't understand somebody, they were from Venezuela. So in Colombia, how much English could we find?
So we found out in El Poblado, we found a lot of gringos actually. A lot of them are Germans, they're from the UK. We met these two cool kids from the UK, just adventuring around.
We don't have a picture with them.
Oh,
they were super cool. If you go to a hostel, you will find so many English speakers. But I will say, for the majority of the time, if you're not from the US, people would try to learn English as a second language. So we met a couple people from Germany, from other countries that spoke different languages, and they still spoke English. So I thought that was pretty impressive because they spoke their native language, English, and a little bit of Spanish. For the most part, though, I would say English is hard to find in Medellin. If you're in El Poblado, which is the most gringo part, you'll find Americans, but how many natives do you see speak English? I would say very few. Axel, the guy that we basically spent our entire time with, he was completely fluent in English, but he was an English teacher for his job. Besides him, remember our first Uber driver from the airport? She spoke very good English.
Pretty good, yeah.
Like I was, and she was like, she learned, I don't know how she learned it, but she wasn't an English teacher. She just like learned it. So she actually spoke it surprisingly well. Anyone else that really spoke English?
I honestly can't remember.
Another thing, we did have Tinder at the time. I did match with someone that said she was like a tour guide, and she actually texted me in English a lot, and I was very impressed by that because, again, she was a native. So whenever someone native from Medellin, from Colombia, they speak English, I get very impressed. Let's talk about homelessness. So I will say this was maybe the hardest part about going to Medellin, was that when you see someone homeless in the U.S., if you have any kind of soul, you want to help them. Like, I always want to help homeless people. In the U.S., though, I don't want to say it's easier to not help them, but it's easier to not help them because you can't help them. Like, we're not considered rich by any means in the U.S., but when you go to Colombia, you are rich, even if you think that you're not. Like,
$5 could feed them for a couple of days.
Exactly. You can make $5 last a while if you're being very, conservative. So that is one thing that almost made it hard about traveling to, this is really almost any third world country, not just Colombia. But it was hard because when they asked me for money or food or anything, it was hard because you can't say yes to every single one.
Right.
Because $5 to a homeless person here, like it'll help, but it might, you can't even get a full meal at a fast food restaurant for $5. Versus in Medellin, like we were saying, it could, if you're smart, it could last you 2 days. I think we did a pretty good job of helping people. Like I remember we went to a restaurant a few times. I do remember that one time we bought that guy, like there was a guy sleeping outside.
Some rolls.
Yeah, some rolls and some
stuff.
chicken. The problem is when there's 1,000 people like that, it's almost like, who do I pick to feed it? I don't know. It was a hard thing to do. But now let's talk about that. So in terms of tipping, people don't tip as much in other countries as they do in the U.S. In the U.S., almost everywhere. I just went to Subway, I ordered a sandwich, and I left. But there was a screen, well, how much do you want to tip them? And I'm like, no offense.
Really didn't do anything.
But I didn't pay for an extreme service. I just needed a sandwich. But let's talk about the U.S. culture versus the Colombian culture. So in Colombia, they don't expect it, but it almost feels like if I'm going to buy a high-quality meal or a high-quality something to eat for $3, I almost want to tip them just because I'm like, first off, thank you for your service, and it's easy for me to do that. Like adding an extra $1 is 25% extra on the meal, and for me, it's
a big
nothing.
deal.
Yeah, so at what point do you not want to tip because you don't want to look like this rich gringo that has a target on their back? And at what point do you want to do your best to help people? Like, where do you kind of draw the line? There was no expectations of tips. Like, the word propina hardly exists. Hardly exists.
I heard it a couple times, but yeah,
Okay.
they're very non-entitled.
Like, let's talk about Ubers. So, the average Uber, no matter how far we went, was maybe $3. It was insane. Like, crazy cheap. And there's an option to tip at the bottom, and it's like it'll give you like 1,000 pesos, 1,500 pesos, 2,000 pesos. The most that you could even tip on Uber was 45 cents, I think. I think that's what 2,000 pesos is. And that is crazy because it makes me feel like, let me go to custom tip and give them like 30,000 pesos. Not that I would every time, but you can sometimes.
I think I did that like once.
It makes a big difference for them, but not a big difference for us. So that's kind of where it's like, where do you draw the line of what's too much tipping? Because you don't want a target on your back. You don't want to look like this rich foreigner. And then one thing, let's talk about the price. So for the most part, it was cheap. Our average Airbnb was probably $20 or less. And typically though, we would type in 2 beds and it would give us a bed and a couch. That part pissed me off.
Okay, that was the same in Mexico too.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that.
We want 2 beds, not like...
So about half the time we were switching between a bed and a couch.
Yeah, and the couches typically in a cheap Airbnb are not comfortable. So it wasn't like great, but I don't know. I'm not gonna sit here and complain. It was $20, so you kind of get what you pay for sometimes. So I guess the question is, how much do you think we were overpaying in El Poblado versus the rest? Because we mostly stayed there. Because your first time to Colombia, I think, should be to El Poblado.
Right. So I did not feel like we were overpaying, but we could have definitely lived a lot cheaper.
Like Parque Laureles and Envigado. Those were like places that were like probably
So it's like
10 to 15 minutes away.
but less gringos.
Less gringos, and so it's cheaper. So I feel like next time I go to Colombia, I want to see the real Colombia versus just the touristic Colombia. I remember specifically went to that Philly cheesesteak place, and it was great. It was good food, whatever, but like it was still like $8, which in the US we're probably paying $11. So you're still saving maybe 30%, but it's like, no, if I go 10 minutes away from this very touristic area, that same meal is $2.50. So that's one thing I feel like we did overpay a little bit, but it kind of depends on what you prefer. Like if it's your first time in Colombia, if you don't speak Spanish, I recommend staying in the safest area and pay the extra, a little bit of extra money.
And you're more likely to be around other English speakers. If you have trouble speaking Spanish, they can help you.
How much did we improve with our Spanish skills from the beginning of the trip to the end of the trip? Now, in this trip, we did go to Medellin, but we also went to La Ciudad de Mexico and Puebla.
Right.
Yeah, so almost a month. So how much of a difference from the beginning to the end of the trip do you think that you had?
I think probably the biggest thing is picking up the accent in Colombia, because the first 3 days in Colombia, we actually had a hard time understanding the accent.
Yes.
And so it took a second for it to kick in.
Yes.
So I'd say our vocabulary was already all right.
Yeah.
But I'd say understanding definitely got a lot better just being immersed.
I actually want to build off of that because I completely agree. I think that the amount of Spanish that I spoke didn't change drastically, but my ability to understand did change drastically. I think from the beginning of the trip to the end of the trip, I was confident that I could have a conversation in Spanish, versus in the beginning, I was like, look, I can say what I need to get by, but I'm not sure how much I can make a friendship or how much I can really ask deep questions to someone. But towards the end, I was feeling better than ever. This isn't a topic I was planning on talking about, but a lot of times they use, what's the word, avergonzada? They use the word like they're ashamed to speak English. Like they have very little self-esteem when it comes to speaking English. I think I know why. It's because for the most part, the pronunciation in English is extraordinarily hard to learn. And so I feel like for an English person learning Spanish, the pronunciation rules relatively are easy, but versus the other way around, I think they do get embarrassed when they say words wrong. Like there's 3 ways to say the word to, T-O, T-O-O, and T-W-O. They're all pronounced the same, but they're over here thinking how do I pronounce these differently? So for the most part, learning Spanish, I think at the beginning of learning Spanish is way easier than the beginning of learning English. But when you get more advanced, I think learning more advanced English is easier than learning more advanced Spanish. So I'm getting now to the point where I'm learning really advanced Spanish, and I'm over here thinking there's no way this is how they do it. So for example, if I want to say in English, if I had a soccer ball, I would play with you. In English, I feel like it's if I had, but in Spanish, it's si tuviera. And that's in Spanish, past tense for I have is tuve or tenía. And so there's 2 ways to say past tense already, but then if you want to say subjunctive, meaning it didn't happen, but if, then you have to say a 3rd level of Spanish that we don't even have in English. It's si tuviera. I know I'm pronouncing that a little bit wrong, but so they have 3 ways of saying I had in Spanish. It's tuve, tenía, tuviera. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. English doesn't have that. What was your favorite part about Colombia? What was the favorite thing that we did? Favorite part of the culture? What was your favorite part?
So that's definitely hard. I really liked when we got massages because they're just so cheap.
Yeah, you can get a legit massage for
and I asked my
$20.
masseur how she learned it, and I got the cups on my back and everything. And she's like, oh, I'm actually a physical therapist. And this massage is cheap. It's $20.
Yeah.
Just buy a friggin' physical therapist.
In the States, right now, I've been working a lot. I've been going to school every day. I would like a massage, but they're $100, and then if they're good, they might not be good. So no, I feel like in Colombia, $25 can be a solid massage. Yeah. My favorite part, I would say genuinely, I'm a total cheap ass in the United States. I love being able to go to a place and pay for things that, modest things. We're not driving supercars, we're not living in mansions, but you can just pay for things and not worry about how much it costs. That was my favorite thing. Because some places in the world where you can go, it's either way too dangerous to be there or the quality is just way too low to where it's not even worth it. I do feel like Medellin was a perfect balance of quality and affordability. I don't think that we were overspending. I don't think we were getting under quality either. I think honestly, it's my favorite place I've ever been. Here every day in the United States, I'm always worried about how can I save more money. I'm spending too much money. I'm not making enough money. And I know that if you're from Colombia, if you're native there, you still have that issue. But when you go from a country like this to a country like that, your dollar goes so much further that you're able to support their economy without it taking a huge hit from your personal bank account. And that, to me, that was my favorite part.
Definitely,
100%.
for sure.
Anyways, overall, 10 out of 10. Out of the 3 places that we went to on that trip, do you think Medellin was your favorite?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, same. So, go Medellin.